Hey, FemFreak followers. Last week I told you all to follow and comment on our Instagram post about Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, a book that I'm telling you right now to go out and buy. Well, for 3 lucky people who actually listen to me, they will now receive a free copy of The New Jim Crow. Phil, can you tell us who these lucky listeners are?
I sure can, Ebony. The winners are That's Amore, Eduardo, and Emerlu3. All of you lucky winners must now privately message Feminist Frequency to claim your copy of The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And now, back to you, Ebony.
Thank you, Phil. I need to remind you all to follow us on Instagram because you never know when these giveaways might happen. And without further ado, please enjoy a brand new, deluxe, hot off the press episode of your favorite and mine, Feminist Frequency Radio.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is episode 17, and I'm your host, Anita Sarkeesian. And I'm joined by my own Mrs. Who and Mrs. What's It, Carolyn Bennett.
Hello.
And Ebony Astor.
Hello, children.
This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love, or alternatively, we're the feminist killjoys coming for your media, depending on your perspective.
And how much time you have.
On today's show, we're going to talk about A Wrinkle in Time, a film we have all been eagerly anticipating. And we'll also comment on the Trump administration's efforts to link violent video games and school shootings. We'll finish the show by each sharing a little something in What's Your FREQ-Out? And as always, exclusively for our fantastic drip backers, we'll be recording a bonus segment. This week, we brought back a fan favorite segment where Carolyn is going to treat us to more dramatic readings from Ernest Cline's novel Ready Player One.
Get ready, y'all.
Everything Feminist Frequency produces, including this very podcast, is listener, reader, and fan supported. Thank you for helping us stay on the air and on the web. If you want access to special perks and exclusive backer awards, join our podcast community at d.rip/femfreak. And if you're looking for another way to support the work we do, including this magical mystery tour of a podcast, why not help us make all of our work more accessible? We're looking for volunteers who can help us transcribe current and past episodes. The future is accessible, and this is one of the ways we get there. Hit us up on Twitter at FemFreak and let us know you're interested, and we'll send you more info. Now, on with the show. What's up, y'all?
Hey.
Hey.
All right.
Oh my gosh.
We are raring to go.
How is everybody?
Woo!
Man, I was just calling Carolyn. So I have really wild dreams, and whatever. They're just weird.
Wait, should this be a bonus episode unto itself? Anita's dream-porium?
My dreams are weird enough that they probably could make their own bonus episode.
I mean, think of all the useful dream interpretations we get from listeners. There might be some dream experts out there who could help you pinpoint exactly what these dreams mean.
Yeah, there could be.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Am I ever in your dreams? Is Carol ever in your dreams?
Both are always in my dreams. This week's tonight's dreams. So what I was saying is that last night, sometimes you have just nonstop dreams all night, and it doesn't feel like you slept at all because they're just so alive. It's almost like you're lucidly dreaming. So that's what happened. But it was weird because it was not a comforting dream, but there were a lot of pets. At one point I opened a door and 20 puppies ran out from under a bed, and it wasn't a good thing, even though it sounds like a good thing. So you both were in my dream as puppies. That were bad.
Did I leave the puppies there for? Oh, we were puppies. I don't like this already. There's no interpretation in which this is me.
You weren't really, but I was trying to bring you in on my weird dreamness. So, anyways, let's not talk about this anymore.
All right.
How's pop culture news doing this week?
So some really good news. CNN reports that this weekend was the first time that films by Black directors with big budgets held the top 2 spots at the box office, with of course Black Panther in the top spot, pulling in I think about 41 million this past week, bringing it over 1 billion in global box office.
Wait, Carol. Do you mean to tell me that there can be more than one black-helmed feature film in theaters at once? It's not a Highlander situation. I was led to believe that this was some sort of competition, that there could be only one.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the reports did unfortunately frame it as like Wrinkle in Time losing to Black Panther.
I was really annoyed that they're like putting them together
against each other in a way that you wouldn't normally do that. But obviously the framing being there, well, here, this film by Ava DuVernay is not doing as well as the film by Ryan Coogler.
Well, we're just so grateful to old man white Hollywood for deigning to, give us a seat at the table. So yeah, I guess it is selfish of us to try and take up more seats at the table when there are so many talented white male directors who are just not getting enough of a shot.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of talented white male directors, that brings us to my other little pop culture story, which is that Ready Player One, the film, had its debut at South by Southwest last night, and Spielberg himself was there. He was in the audience. He spoke like before and or after the movie. I don't know. But most of the tweets coming out of that were kind of raves, but you have to think that, well, this is an audience of people at South by Southwest who also are in the room with Steven Spielberg, which, is probably going to like generate some excitement and stuff. And there were definitely a few tweets as well that were a little more critical. Also, so TJ Miller, the Silicon Valley actor, who he's in the film. And
how did these dudes keep?
Well, obviously the film was shot long before the accusations and
but he's been a doofus forever.
Yeah, for real.
Sure.
For real.
So there were some people, one person, for instance, tweeted, Steven Spielberg is my favorite filmmaker of all time, and to be in the same room as him would be a dream come true, but TJ Miller's transphobic and abusive email is why this won't happen tomorrow night at South by Southwest Ready Player One. So, people, obviously. And I saw another tweet where somebody was like, it made me cringe every time the whole audience erupted in laughter at TJ Miller's bits or, whatever. So,
as much as I've been talking shit about this movie, and rest assured, I will continue to make that my ministry. But I would actually be surprised. Like, okay, we've gone back and forth as to whether Anita can force me to see this movie. And y'all know
Carolyn's the one that... Wait, don't put this on me.
You're the
you
boss.
And I are
you
aligned
sign the
here.
checks. You sign the checks. Anyway, listen, I know I'm going to see this movie, and I would honestly be surprised if I didn't find it satisfying at some level. It is a movie, it is a novel designed to hit all the spots your lizard brain wants. That is the point of it,
Exactly.
And there's no way that a talented filmmaker like Steven Spielberg doesn't know how to hit those beats. Like, of course, I'm going to enjoy the movie, while at the same time recognizing that just because I appreciate those dopamine hits doesn't mean it's good for my dumb ass. So, whatever.
Exactly.
Looking forward to it, not really.
Yeah, no, you're not looking forward to it at all.
No, I'm not, but you know that I love giving you the business, so it'll be a banner week for me.
Sure. All right, let's dive into A Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, A Wrinkle in Time is Ava DuVernay's latest film, where she adapts the beloved children's book of the same name by Madeleine L'Engle.
Is it?
L'Engle. I clearly don't have adequate notes this morning. It's fine. Everything's fine. Yeah. Cool. Let's talk about it. Who wants to start?
So,
well, let's say how we watched the movie.
Okay, yes,
so
let's do that.
We saw it on Wednesday night because we got the opportunity to host a community. We hosted with another nonprofit in the Bay Area called Camp Real Stories. And we were able to bring out community members to be a part of this early screening for free to see the movie. So that's how Carolyn and I saw it, which was really cool. There were so many kids there. There was lots of people of color there. And it was like a super energized environment to see it in.
The only downside was that we couldn't take notes the way we can at our preferred theater.
They like bag and tag your phones because it's a pre-screening and they're so like intensely
Disney,
worried.
Obviously keeps their properties under lock and key and goes far overboard in trying to prevent piracy and early exposure.
Well, they've probably heard about your side business, Caro, selling pirated DVDs down at the hair store. But so y'all got to go to this, wonderful Bay Area community advanced screening, whereas, my broke ass had to shell out money here in LA. But I tried to replicate the experience y'all had by taking 2 kids with me. Well, I say kids, but
Did you just find them?
I did. I just listened. And you know what? People were into it. They were like, please take these kids off my plate for a couple of hours.
I'm sure that would happen.
Absolutely. I look trustworthy. But no, so I took a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old to this movie, and I'm so glad I did, because I know for a fact my experience of the movie was different sitting next to those 2 young women than it would have been had I gone by myself. It forced me to kind of stay in the mindset of remembering who this film was created for, and recognizing that the kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge ways in which, we expect adult narratives to be constructed would not be necessarily appropriate, for a film like this. It is a children's movie. It is a beloved children's classic. And no matter how nostalgic you may be for it, the fact is it was written for children. This movie was, executed for children. And so I was so glad that I had those 2, little crumb snatchers next to me, keeping me honest with it, because otherwise I suspect I would have had the same reaction that a lot of reviewers are having, which is the story, seems kind of meandering and kind of a mess and whatever. And I'm like, hey, when was the last time you read that book? Because it absolutely captures that faithfully, but also it may not be for you, and you should be happy to have that. It doesn't mean it's lesser than or worse. It just means it ain't for you.
Yeah, totally. Before we walked in, Carolyn made a passing comment that I don't think was necessarily setting me up, but it did, to be I'm just going into this thing it's a kids movie, and remembering that helped a lot. I'm on the side of the critics on this one, which means that I don't want to talk about it. But it's not often that I feel bad critiquing a film. I think that there is value that this film exists. I'm glad it was made. I think that it's a hot mess, I've been dreading having this conversation since we saw the movie, because I wanted it to be better than it was.
Sure. I think one criticism we can all agree and level at this film is that when Reese Witherspoon turns into that big flying creature, she looks like a leaf of lettuce. Come on, people.
That was my primary
get it
criticism,
together.
But
no, seriously, I really liked this movie as a kids and family film. I liked it a lot, but I do feel if you should have done a couple more passes on some of these concepts and stuff to just get them looking better than they do.
Ava DuVernay is a remarkable filmmaker. I've enjoyed the other works that I've seen of hers a lot, and I think that they're really smart. I'm wondering if Disney got all up in the shit here and didn't let it be what she may have envisioned. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
actually, so, some people I think felt like the filmmaking in terms of the shots and so on felt a bit, I think some people would have put it amateurish. I didn't read it as amateurish at all. I read it as having the kind of earnest, down-to-earth quality that I saw in Ava's early indie films, where it's I really felt like this film was, she wanted to, I know it sounds cheesy, and I know I say stuff like this all the time, but in this case it's really, really true. This is a film about love, it really that's one of the guiding themes as what wins the final battle in the end. It's not like some comic book movie action sequence with punching and kicking. It's love, that turns the tide. And I really felt like there was, the shots at home of the mom who's so played by Gugu Mbatha-Raw, who's, just lights up the screen and everything she's in my opinion. I just felt like the kind of intimacy of the camera work and stuff made me feel the love in that home, so that when Nathan, he's leaving the house and he's there's something in the house that, I don't know what it is. There's something there, and I'm well, it's love, which is obviously something that's
Calvin?
not in... Is it Calvin? I thought it was Nathan, but...
I think it's Calvin.
The Calvin, okay. Because we see that his home is a scary, place that he isn't treated with love by, his father and stuff. So, I liked the kind of I think it's a very sincere film, and I respond to that. Like I really like the sincerity of it.
There's a quote in Vox by Todd Vanderwerf's review of it, where this is in line with what you're saying, is Wrinkle isn't afraid to be desperately sincere and needy. It's not a movie that wears its heart on its sleeve. It's a movie that wears its heart as a shirt, which makes it all too easy to pick on. And so his argument is that he thinks that it values feelings over narrative, and that's good, right? The title is that is literally the title of his piece. Yes. Anyways, other people agree with you.
I mean, yeah, and so just for my part, like, obviously, and I mean, I have personal experiences with films, and in this case, like, Meg's journey, like her personal journey, resonated with me a lot. There's a part early on where I think Oprah, Mrs. Switch kind of tells Meg, like, that Meg doesn't test her well because it's like she wants to be somebody else. Right? And, like, I really liked how, in the end, I mean, Meg is confronted with this kind of, twistedly idealized version of herself. In this, I mean, her hair is straight, right? And she's wearing like very feminine clothes, and she's kind of like got she's just more confident in like and Meg.
I mean, she's like a mean girl.
Yeah,
she's like the mean girl.
Yeah,
at school.
Yeah, and Meg, the real Meg has to learn that she herself is worthy of love. Like, that to me is like the real revelation. Is not like her saying like, I love you, Charles Wallace, or whatever, but like her getting to the place where she proclaims like, I have all these faults, I'm impulsive, I'm this, I'm that, and I'm worthy of love. Like that. I mean, I just know that 12-year-old me would have like totally identified with Meg and
me too.
And been so grateful for that experience.
I would have camped out in the movie theater and seen it 17 more times if I was 12 years old. This is exactly what I would have wanted as a 12-year-old. Seeing, like, as much as I can tap into, my 12-year-old mindset, I'm trying to imagine what it would have been like to see Storm Reed as Meg Murray, portraying this character that I loved in a book that I loved. And so accurately, allowing her to kind of inhabit the grief of losing her father, being misunderstood at school. I think, in many ways, people who have a very superficial understanding of like middle grade or young adult literature don't realize how important it is to kind of capture the bigness of your emotion at that place in your life. And that book does it so incredibly well, just that feeling that you're misunderstood, that people don't get it. And the ways in which you're sometimes kind of, act out in, what are to you even, irrational ways, So I love that the movie got that. And I just thought like, Storm Reed, her face is so expressive in those moments when she's with her mother and her father. Like, I was blown away by her performance, especially as opposed to Charles Wallace, who drove me banana soup in this movie. I mean, I loved this movie, but that kid, one thing I actually liked is that I didn't like Charles Wallace in the books, and I didn't like him in the movie either. It drove me crazy. So I was like, well, that's good.
I think that child actors are real hard. They're just it's very, very unlikely you're going to find a child actor who's not terrible. And basing a huge core of this movie on making this kid have to like basically code switch, right? Like go between being, like lovable little brother and like evil monster
mastermind.
Yeah, like it did not work, and they put so much gave him so much airtime with that. And I was like, oh, man,
But again, Anita, I think, this is one of the things where it's important to remember that the ways in which children pick up on certain cues, I don't want to say it's less sophisticated, but sometimes things need to be in broader strokes. And so while that performance drove me bananas, I don't know that I would have had the same reaction to him if I were 8 years old. I think I might understand it better.
That's the other point I was about to make, is that I think...
Too late.
Well, not that point, but related to that is there is a huge tension with the fact that this is a children's movie. And we are very used to kids' movies being like, quote unquote, all ages movies, right? Pixar makes movies that are animated, that are great for kids, but it's family fun. Everyone come and see them, and there'll be jokes for adults and jokes for kids, and et cetera, et cetera. This isn't that. This is a straight up kids movie that is not necessarily being advertised as such and is not being released in the way that most kids' movies are being released, I don't think. And so a lot of adults, especially those of us in this environment who care greatly about representation, who care greatly about like who is behind the scenes getting access to making these big important films, went into it expecting
hoping for
something on a level which we can identify with. But like the people who have, I think, said like that they like the conversation that you two are having right now is my younger self would have liked this, and I'm trying to tap into that feeling. Not I enjoyed it as an adult necessarily.
Oh no, I did. I absolutely did enjoy it as an adult. I would have enjoyed it in a different way, I think, and perhaps a more complete way as a young person. But you know, I loved this movie. There were moments. I mean, I am not ashamed to say that I did cry. There were moments. Okay. You can talk about how, like, Oprah Winfrey as a, 20-foot tall character is a little bit on the nose, but whatever.
No, giant Oprah, I can't be down with her. That was awful. And the CGI was awful.
I quit. Today is my last day.
Yeah,
Today is my last day.
I can't. And the CGI in the whole thing was just such a mess.
I loved it. But there were moments when the close-ups on her face reminded me so much of wanting to touch my mother's face, like it just looked so soft, And so when Charles Wallace touches her face, like I was right there, like I just had a very emotional moment. But no, I had a great time watching this movie. I was overcome by how beautiful it was. And it did, I feel like, it allowed me to tap into, kind of a moment of pure whimsy and fantasy that I just loved, And if anything, my criticisms of the movie would be about kind of the criticisms that you have with any book to film adaptation. There are certain things that get, left behind and lost for various reasons. Like I have questions about, for instance, the characterization of Calvin in this movie, because in the book, he comes from a very large family and it's a poor family. I mean, if I'm remembering correctly. And he spends, one of the things that he loves about spending time at the Murray house is that, he's kind of enfolded in their love and attention in a way that he doesn't get at his own house, simply because his parents don't have the ability, And so the fact that he's kind of presented as like the only child of a very like upper middle class, angry dad seemed an interesting choice to me, and not one necessarily that I think was as interesting. So those are my, comments about the movie. But in terms of like actually sitting there and enjoying it, no, it was a good, 2 hours of an afternoon. I'm glad I went.
I really loved Reese Witherspoon in this.
Huh.
I really enjoyed her characterization of that character, and that was like one of the few things that I actually enjoyed in this film.
I am so uncomfortable with the situation in which Anita's the only person who is going to bat for the salty position. Like, normally, this is my role.
Normally, it's me against... But I feel like normally it's me liking something and that both of you not
like
liking
on
it.
I know.
So, like, I'm glad that Ebony's kind of, we're both on the same team for once. It's a nice
I am
feeling.
team sincerity this week.
Yeah.
I'm glad. Again, I think the value and importance of this film is so much bigger than me being like, I didn't like it. Right. And I don't know what to do with that, because like as a critic, I should be able to feel comfortable being like, here are all X, Y, and Z reasons that this film didn't work. But also like, who gives a shit? Like this is going to be powerful and magical for lots of young kids. And also like in terms of who gets to make films and,
yeah. Well,
and I hope that this doesn't damage that.
Despite what people think about the power of feminist frequency and Anita Sarkeesian in particular, I think you should feel free to, not be the cheerleader for the movie. Anita.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I don't think that I'm going to affect anything, but I think that there is a tension between, like, just as, not all critics come with representation and, like, I am a media critic because I believe the media can change the world, right? And I think that this is a movie that is a very much a part of that larger conversation. Most critics are just doing the reviews, right? They're like, it's my job to look critically at films and say whether I like them or not. So I think that I don't think that I changed the world by any means, but I do feel that tension inside of me as, like, what is the goal and purpose of what we do?
Well, we will keep an eye on the box office and see what happens after we release this podcast, if that affects the ticket sales.
Oh my God, Ebony, shut the fuck up.
One other concern, though, I had that Anita just reminded me of when she said about who gets to make films is, I hope that Ava DuVernay, if this film is, it doesn't meet expectations at the box office or whatever, I hope that Ava DuVernay's career is not impacted because, white guys keep making mediocre blockbusters and still, like, failing up, right? They still get, like, to make, the next Jurassic World or the next Star Wars or whatever. And, I hope that Ava DuVernay, because she's a black woman and not a white man, doesn't suffer, doesn't find herself, like, struggling to find work because this film may not quite have performed as well as folks wanted it to.
Well, I think, obviously, I curate who I listen to, but in terms of just, like, purely social media reactions, people I know who are seeing the movie are like, yep, you know what, took my kids to see it, they loved it. And so I think in terms of those expectations, it's going to do absolutely fine. It's the folks who expected it to be, the end all be all, who may, feel as if, underperformed. But I think those benchmarks were inappropriate to begin with. It's a fun movie. It's a beautiful movie, and yeah, I'm team Wrinkle in Time. And Meg's little button nose. Are you kidding me? Her little nose. I couldn't. It was too much. It was too cute.
All right, let's move to
that note.
Let's move to a completely different, worse topic.
Yeah.
Trump says dumb things, in case you're ever wondering about that, and decided to scapegoat video games as the latest. What the fuck am I saying? Trump said.
The eternal question.
It's those puppy dreams that are really throwing me off today. Trump was accusing video games of, like, the reason why there is mass shooting.
Yeah. I mean, the White House is currently trying to draw a very direct line between violence in video games and, specific acts of violence.
God, I've never heard this before.
So
I've never heard this argument before 200,000 other times.
And the reason why I thought it might be good for us to talk about on the podcast is because so many people out there, so many on Twitter, so many of our detractors and stuff are using this as an opportunity to try to discredit, like, our attitudes about media. So, for instance, one person totally mischaracterizing our critiques of media, said, "My issue with FemFreak is that you can't spend 4 years claiming games perpetuate sexism and then flip and fight against Trump claiming games perpetuate violence. They killed their own argument. It either does or doesn't. Can't have it both ways or 50-50. So here's the thing about that, right? We never said regarding, like, sexism that if, 15-year-old Jimmy Smith sits down and plays Super Mario Brothers, he's going to go out and behave misogynistically toward women, right? That is not our argument, that games, like, cause individuals to go out and be misogynistic. It's that games perpetuate a culture, a larger culture, in which men very often feel entitled to women's bodies, women's sexuality, in which women are just objectified and seen as less than fully human, and so on. And so, similarly with violent games, like, we would never make the kind of... clearly the Trump administration is making this kind of connection as a distraction tactic from actually doing anything about the issue, which would mean addressing, like, the availability of guns and, like, fucking assault rifles that no human being needs to own.
Yeah, it's very frustrating because we're being inundated with you hypocrite, what's wrong with you, blah blah blah, and I'm like, oh, you clearly don't understand the nuanced argument that we have been putting forth for years. And I've definitely critiqued violence in games and will continue to do it, but the critique isn't what Trump and all of these politicians for fucking decades have been putting forth, even though that is attributed to us without any basis in reality. And here's the thing that happens with these kinds of conversations that I find extremely frustrating, and I think is happening slightly less this time, is that whenever you have a politician come out and say, oh, video games are the cause of violence, and so we need to ban video games, et cetera, the entire industry and fan community battens down the hatches and is like, fuck you. Video games don't have any effect on anyone for any reason. They're just fun, entertainment, pastimes. And it's really hard to be able to then squeeze in a nuanced argument of, you know, we need to actually analyze some of this stuff, but it's not the core, it's not the causation that you're trying to say that it is. And is probably relatively unrelated to the actual incident that it's being scapegoated for. This time around, while there has been a lot of the battening down the hatches, which I understand why that's happening, there are more conversations happening about wait, shut the fuck up and don't ruin the nuanced conversation we need to have. So Chris Plant wrote for The Guardian an article being there is a conversation that needs to happen, and it's not the one Trump's putting forth. One of the bits that he wrote was, there is another serious conversation about the medium's comfort with violence. Games have the power to reflect the entirety of human experience, yet they often still default to conflict and gore. Right? And one of the things we talk about is why is violence the primary means of conflict resolution in games over and over and over again? Not don't have it, not take your games away, but let's do more with this incredible interactive medium. I mean, that is my big concern, is that tactics like what Trump is doing right now make people have those knee-jerk reactions to any suggestion of a conversation, to saying hey, well, maybe games do contribute to a glorification of violence and broader ideas about violence in our culture. And there's this kind of knee-jerk no, you almost immediately jumping to you want to ban games, or you want to ban violent I tweeted a few things this week about what I think violence in video games actually does, and a few people replied to me equating just the mere hint of a conversation with banning games or taking all the games away, and I'm who's talking about banning anything? It's always been thrown at us. Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating, and I completely lost my train of thought. I had something to say.
Well, let me jump in here and say,
yeah, please.
One of the things that I found really interesting and provocative about the conversation that's happening about this is there appears to be fairly little distinction between the types of media effects that happen. So people say are putting forward the argument that, violence in video games provokes violence in the real world, and people disagree or don't or agree with that, right? But there's more than one type of media effect, and I think media critics and media scholars really want to help people tease out the different kinds of effects. So you have things the timing or duration, the type of effect, intention, micro or macro effects. But one of the important things that I think feminist frequency does is really explore the effect of enforcing the status quo. So it's not about individual people playing individual games and then being inspired to commit violent acts. It's about, as Carol says, kind of the reinforcement effect of this larger culture of violence. So, I think acknowledging a media effect does not equate to saying that one particular media provoked that effect or instigated that effect or is the sole is solely at fault. But yeah, I think it absolutely does play into a larger culture of being, kind of obsessed with a certain kind of conflict resolution, you know? There's just this very simplistic, collapsing of all different types of media effects into one that then are comparatively easy to dismiss.
Totally. And related to the thing I forgot and now remember is that that's a much more articulate and better way of describing what I was about to say. But I think that there is very much this sense that media has no bearing on my life. Mm-hmm. And we get this a lot. A lot of the pushback to our work is like, how dare you, media does nothing. It doesn't have any effect on me at all. And that
while at the same time demanding that I want to see the exact type of media that I want to see, which includes scantily clad women and hyper-masculine dudes shooting the, brains out of aliens. But even though that's what I demand, nevertheless, media doesn't affect me. And I'm a lone actor. I exist in a cultural vacuum. Man, if you don't get the fuck hypothetical person I'm arguing with.
But it reminds me of, it just seemed like everything impacts us and everything influences us. And, if you do sociological stuff, if you studied Sociology 101, you're going to learn about, the spheres of influence, which are peer groups and religious groups and family, and media is one of those spheres, right? And so, you can't just pull media out and not connect it to all of the other spheres. So, misogyny in media is not in a vacuum. It is related to the misogyny in, the real world and how that's all connected, right? And so, there are very clear examples of this, of how the media affects us. I think one of the clearest ones is when Jaws was released. How, and so I was actually researching this just quickly before we started the podcast. And, okay, so when Jaws was released, people, stopped going to the beach. Legitimately, there was, a huge drop in tourism at certain, beaches because people were legitimately afraid of sharks. And the article that I briefly scanned said that, even today, years later, decades later, people still cite Jaws as the reason that they're afraid of sharks. A fictional movie, right? And that, I feel like that's an easier example because it's not putting a value claim on, an individual and their, whatever. But even things like body image, I think we generally accept that body image issues are related to the media. That is an arena that people are oh yeah, totally, right? Having disproportionately absurdly thin ideals as the sense of what beauty is, and then young women and adult women trying to attain those ideals that's generally accepted in our culture that's a thing, right? But when it comes to media or video games or things that are a little more subtle, all of a sudden it's how dare you fucking take our games away? And I'm how did you get there? How did you get there, right?
Yeah, and I mean, even critics. So I read a couple of really interesting pieces, and I will put the links for it or have Carolyn put the links for it in the show description for this episode. But a quote that I shared with Caro yesterday was by a writer. Is it Tom Bissell?
Bissell, yeah.
And from a piece called 13 Ways of Looking at a Shooter from the late lamented Grantland website. And the quote is, "I guess I find these games insanely irresponsible and also somehow irresistible, which is what I most hate about them. Couldn't you argue that the men and women who make Battlefield and Modern Combat and Call of Duty are making the world a demonstrably worse place? I think you could. Sometimes I wonder how they sleep at night. Sometimes when I can't sleep at night, I play Call of Duty." I think there's this tension, right? Between people who are yeah, there's clearly something going on. Maybe we should explore what draws us, to these kinds of stories, these kind of mechanics constantly. And while at the same time being okay, we can unpack it, but don't take it away from me. The last thing I want to do is take, that. I mean, think about what that is, that as a comfort blanket, as something that people go to as a stress reliever, as an anxiety reliever, is something that demonstrably raises your cortisol levels, just on a level of autonomic responses. People want to fight and shoot.
Right. When I hear people talk about how to them shooters or violent video games are a stress release valve, that they actually calm them down, I don't know. I mean, I understand a person believing that that's true about their lives, but when I think about who's truly calm, I think about Tibetan monks, right? People who live like in a true state of calm. And I mean, their lack of exposure to violent media is part of how they are able to maintain such a state of calm, right? You put like a Tibetan monk in front of Doom or whatever, they're going to be horrified, right, by the display of violence. By playing that is not going to help them calm down.
Well, there is definitely like a normalization and a desensitization of being exposed to this stuff.
But I mean, so my favorite kind of anecdote that's come out of all these conversations was actually in a piece written that Simon Parkin wrote, where he talks about how he's talking about GoldenEye, which is like the first, I think, like first-person shooter that was published by Nintendo on a Nintendo console, and the little anecdote says, Martin Hollis, a developer of the 1997 James Bond-themed game GoldenEye 007, told me that he once received a fax from Shigeru Miyamoto, the inventor of Super Mario, calling the game tragic and horrible. Miyamoto proposed that at the end of GoldenEye, players should be forced to shake hands with their victims as they lay recovering in hospital beds. The idea was never implemented. And, like, I don't want us to live in a world where, we all react to any action movie or violent video game is like, oh my God, that's tragic and horrible. But I do think we should be able to imagine that, like just sit with that idea for a little bit, that of what it would be like if we culturally, if we as people like abhorred violence to that degree that like we saw a game where somebody was going around killing other people and we're like, oh my God, that's horrible.
Yeah. And the media puts forth values, and there's there is a question of what values do we want to see the media promote and encourage, and which ones do we not? And like this goes back to what Ebony was saying around the status quo, like what media is perpetuating the status quo, which we like the oppressive status quo. How is that shifting and changing? And that's part of it, like showing violence as tragic and showing violence as harmful to everybody involved, including the people who commit the acts of violence, I think would be really valuable, right? And having more of that would be really valuable. But it doesn't mean that we can't have multiple representations. Like, remember, the trope series is predicated on the idea that, like, these are patterns that have, like, that you see over and over and over again. And when you see patterns again and again and again and again, what does that mean for how you internalize those kinds of messages, right? So, like, having these more subtle conversations, which is what we have been trying to do, is I think really valuable. But this bullshit of like Trump trying to scapegoat, actually doing, like, other countries have mass shootings and then they ban guns and then they don't have anymore. Like,
it's not a mystery.
Period.
It's not a mystery what the fucking problem is at all.
No, it's incredibly frustrating. One thing I want to
there's
say
clearly
real quick,
some there. Like, the global military industrial complex would not be shipping money, like helping fund shit in the video game industry if they didn't see that there was some effect. I mean, just like, come on, y'all. Come on.
One thing I want to just say really quickly is that what you were you said something earlier that made me think about this. People have different reactions to like the calming effect of playing violent games or whatever. And I think that that's related to like the psychology around fight or flight. And so for me, like the adrenaline of certain video games is stressful. I don't find it relaxing, where other people genuinely do. And like, that's fine. I think like, whatever. I put no judgment on that. But Brie Code, who used to work for Assassin's Creed on the Assassin's Creed franchise, has now started her own studio. And she talks about how when we talk about fight, flight, or freeze, we don't talk about the other aspect of it, which is tend and befriend, which is a completely other way of reacting to stressful stimuli. And she is exploring how to make games for the people who react like that. It's super fascinating stuff. I don't know if there's anything online about it, but I'll try to find some links for everyone. Let's move on.
All right.
To what's your freak out? Ebony, you're going to start this week. What's your freak out?
Okay. I have two freakouts, and one is a a proactive freak out. Is that acceptable? Whatever. It's going to have to be. What are you going to do? Stop me in the middle of it? So there's a new book. Listen, if you want to try and get in my face about this, you're going to have to do it after the recording. So my freak outs are both.
I love that you just made me sound like a total monster when I don't even care at all.
I know. Well, that's how I talk about you on Twitter. And so I want to make sure that,
Fair.
I'm keeping up with your brand. So one is a book that I just heard about this weekend called Body Minds Reimagined by Dr. Sammy Schalk. I hope I'm pronouncing their name correctly. But the book is about, and I'm reading from the Amazon description here, it traces how Black women's speculative fiction complicates the understanding of body minds, the intertwinement of the mental and the physical in the context of race, gender, and disability. So it's about bridging Black feminist theory with disability studies. I cannot wait for this book. Like, I broke a finger pre-ordering this shit. So I'm sure to talk about it in a future episode. But I just want to encourage other people to get out there and get on this book. It comes out on the 16th. If you pre-order it now and go to Dr. Schalk's Twitter feed, you can get a code for 30% off. Did I just turn this into an ad? Whatever. Try and stop me. Okay, so that's my first freak out. The second one is I am finally reading the Vorkosigan Saga by Lois McMaster Bujold, which is just like an iconic sci-fi text. And the reason why I wanted to read it is because I had gotten so many great reviews from friends. Like, I think the first book came out in like 85 or something. But friends who know what a huge space opera fan I am, just like those kind of sprawling, epic dramas, set in some far future techno, world. Like, I eat that shit up. But specifically, the fact that it's not just like a boner for battles in space, right up my alley. So I just started reading that. I am in the first book, which is pre-Miles for Ghosts Again. And the reason why this is interesting is because Miles is one of the few openly disabled characters in all of fiction, right? But specifically in science fiction, and is such a beloved character, and I can't wait to get into his adventures. It's like super spy, raconteur, incredibly charming, outlaw, rogue, whatever. Like, I can't wait to get into it. So, 30 years late, I'm getting into the Vorkosigan Saga. Don't get at me about how I'm a day late and $1 short, because I don't care. That's my freak out.
It sounds great. I'm curious to check it out myself.
Yeah. Carol.
Yeah.
What is your freak out this week?
So for a while I've been craving. Anita, you'll relate to this really well.
Tacos.
For a while I've been
Bacon. I had bacon for dinner last night.
No, for a while I've been craving a good
science fiction show.
Do you want me to come over there, Carol?
Love story?
Have
you been craving a love story, Carol?
For a while, I've been craving a good JRPG.
Oh, God. Oh,
I like our options better, Carol.
Yeah.
Do you want to walk this back?
Bacon and tacos.
So I've been kind of looking for like a good.
I didn't know this about you, Carol. I'm a little concerned.
In the style or the vein of some of the better 16-bit era, like SNES era JRPGs, and there's a new release on the 3DS, which I haven't had an excuse or reason to use my 3DS in a while, but they just put out a game called, with the ridiculous title of Radiant Historia Perfect Chronology. And,
Wow.
I mean, typical, JRPG title there for sure. But it's totally hitting the sweet spot for me so far. I'm only a few hours in, and it's definitely one of those, like, who knows, 60, 70-hour epics, so I've barely scratched the surface. But in terms of just the graphical style, the characters, the world that it creates, and everything, it's definitely like a high-quality game in the vein of classic JRPGs. It does some really fun stuff with like time travel, where you go between these two timelines, and you might encounter a problem in one timeline that won't let you proceed, so you have to jump to the other timeline and find a way to solve a problem there that then impacts the other timeline. And it sounds more complicated than it is. It's actually just kind of makes the narrative, more involved and interesting. And so I'm having a great time with it. If you are, a 16-bit JRPG fan and you've never played Radiant Historia, it's I recommend checking it out on the 3DS.
Sweet. My freak out this week is all right. Let's take a little intro here. I spent a day this week going to a conference called Bond, B-O-N-D, that was put on by BackerKit to bring in creators and listen to talks and have people meet each other and that sort of thing. And one of the speakers was Indira Rojas. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sorry. And she is the founder of Anxy, which is a mental health magazine. And I subscribe to Anxy, and so it was a pleasure hearing her talk. So I want to promote this magazine. It is one of the most beautiful, beautifully designed, graphic designed magazines I've seen in a really long time. So that's, to be totally transparent, the reason I subscribed to it to begin with, because I'm such a sucker for really good print design. But I love the concept of it. I think the issues come out twice a year. And it is a magazine about mental health, about anxiety, about fear, anger, trauma, shame. It's not a self-help magazine, though. It's stories of experiences that people have had. And I think what they're trying to do is to remind folks that, having mental health concerns and issues is kind of the norm. You're not abnormal for dealing with depression and trauma, and that we need to destigmatize all of that. And so just by telling these stories every issue, and, both just doing personal reflections and a little bit more analysis around some of these topics, they're trying to destigmatize it. So the first two issues, the first one is the anger issue, and the next one is workaholic, which I think a lot of people can relate to. And so each issue is a different, is looking at a different topic. And what I really liked about her talk was that she went into a very personal, very emotional personal history about what brought her to the place of wanting to do this. But she also brought up studies around trauma and how that affects us, and how it influences our the ways we exist, the choices we make. It influences our work in such substantial ways. So I recommend checking out the magazine. Maybe pick up an issue if you like it. Subscribe. It's Anxy. It's ANXY, and you can find out more at anxymag.com. So ANXYMAG.com. That's our show. You can catch us back here every single Wednesday, and next week we'll be diving into season 2 of Jessica Jones, so please tune in for that. We could not make this podcast happen without our generous backers on Drip. Drip is Kickstarter's brand new subscription-based crowdfunding platform, so help us keep bringing this podcast to you every week by joining the FemFreak community. We've got some great rewards for you, so pitch in now at d.rip/FemFreak. If you're enjoying the show, we have a small favor to ask. Please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this podcast, because it really helps us spread the word about the show. And, tell your friends. You can check out all of our work and our other podcasts at feministfrequency.com, and follow us on Twitter at FemFreak to stay up to date on all of the latest news. We want to hear from you as well, so where can we find you, Carol?
You can find me at Carolyn Michelle.
Ebony, where are you at?
At Ebony Aster.
And I am at Anita Sarkeesian. Our producer is Phil Circus, who also composed our theme music. We will see you all next week.
Later.
Bye.